Welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio Podcast. Episode 318, Maintaining Open Source Libraries at Software Mansion with Kacper Kapuściak.
Mazen, I have a question for you. When you are working on a project, do you put all of the windows for that project, like your terminal, VS Code, a browser, a simulator, all in the same screen? Or are you doing sort of like the Mac OS swipe back and forth spaces thing on your screen? Or do you have like 85 monitors? Like, how do you arrange your windows when you're working on a project?
Wow, what a question. How much time do you have?
Well, we can talk about this the rest of the episode if you want.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll give you the TLDR that's very long here. I have two monitors and my laptop screen all open at the same time. My laptop has 4 desktops. One monitor has 3. The other monitor has 7 desktops. Each desktop is arranged by item. So I have one for podcast episode. I have one for client project. I have one for mail. I have one for Slack. Like I said, I could keep going here. And then within each one, it's organized in a certain way for ergonomics so that I'm not turning my neck too much. Because most of you that have seen me, I'm tall and I always have neck and back issues. So I kind of hold it that way. But what I do is when I'm working on a client, one monitor on the left has like all the windows. So like for me to do all my Googling, email, Jira and all that. And the main one the one right in front of me has iOS, Android, simulator, emulator, terminal, and the code all in one. And it's organized in a way.
Man, that's awesome. I love hearing about this stuff. Okay, I'm going to introduce him in a second, but Kacper, you're our guest, but I want to hear your setup as well. How do you approach this?
I just have another monitor and my laptop, and I'm just swiping like crazy between the windows. Have all of them as a full screen window, and then swiping all the time, switching
everything
windows.
Full screen.
Most of the stuff full screen. Obviously not simulator, but yeah,
right,
like Slack, Chrome, this type of thing.
Wow. Yeah, I'm kind of a hybrid there, where like I have some full screen like Slack and Discord and stuff. So I just have one like 5K in front of me and then like a vertical 1080p on the left. And the vertical has like stuff that I monitor all the time. Like, you know, we have like some internal tools and things like that, as well as Discord. And then in front of me is more project oriented stuff. So yeah, each space is a project. So it'll have its own, I might have like 3 projects going. These are all usually like side projects or open source or something like that. So they'll have their own VS Code, or actually now I'm on Cursor, their own simulator, their own web browser, their own everything that I can like, just, it's all self-contained in one space, and they're not full screen. There's a little bit peeking out like of each window. So like if I want to switch to Cursor, I just click on the part that's showing up. That's how I switch between windows. Everybody has their own workflow. I'm sure everybody in the audience right now is thinking about theirs. And if you want to tweet at, it's React Native
RDIO.
Sorry, I couldn't remember it. If you want to tweet at React Native RDIO and tell us what your setup is, like how do you approach window management in your projects? We might do an episode at some point where we talk about all the different ways that you can do that, because that'd be really fun to do.
I need to work on mine. I mean, you didn't even ask how many tabs I have, but we'll keep that for another episode.
I really feel like this should be an episode. But we're not here to talk about that. We are here to record a podcast about a different topic. So let me introduce everybody. I'm Jamon Holmgren, your host, friendly CTO of Infinite Red. I am in the now starting to turn cooler and rainy Pacific Northwest with my wife and my kids. I play rec hockey. And by the way, that just started and my teams are amazing, which means I don't actually have a lot to do. I did just win a game in a shootout by shutting out the other team, so I'll take a little credit. And I drive my tractor whenever it's not broken, which it is currently. I'm joined today by my co-host Mazen and our guest Kacper Kapuściak. Mazen lives in North Carolina with his wife and toddler. He's a former pro soccer player and coach and is a senior React Native engineer, also here at Infinite Red. Kacper is a React Native open source developer at Software Mansion. He lives in Krakow, Poland, or otherwise pronounced Krakow or Krakow or any other way, depending on where you're from. I told someone that I was going to Poland, and they asked like what cities I'd been to, and I said I've never been to Krakow, and they were like, that's not how you pronounce it. And I was like, oh, apparently that's a German way to do it. Is that right, Kacper? You say?
Yeah, pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably butchered it in all of them. But anyway, Kacper has been working for Software Mansion for 4 years, and was originally doing more front end, I assume web, and then kind of went more toward mobile development, React Native. He also hosts the React Native community in Krakow, and so that's pretty fun. Kacper, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. How's it going?
Pretty good. Second time on the show, and you also were at Chain React earlier this year.
Yeah, that's true. As a speaker.
Yeah, that was awesome. Okay, before we get into the topic, let's hear from our sponsor. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US. We're a team of 30 senior plus level React Native developers and support staff, and have been doing this for nearly a decade. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up at infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, let's get into our topic for today, maintaining open source libraries at Software Mansion. And I think I'm actually really curious to pick your brain on this, Kacper, because obviously we do open source here at Infinite Red. We're a much smaller team. How big is Software Mansion now at this point?
Around 300 people working at Software Mansion at this moment. So we are growing really rapidly.
Yeah.
That's a lot of new challenges.
Like by the time this comes out, it might be 400, 500, 600. Yeah. No, I know you're growing very quickly, and but like you're really known for your open source. Like this is kind of like Software Mansion, open source, and it's not just like, it's like all the way through your organization, because of course Christoph and I have kind of kept a bit of a, we play chess every time we see each other and stuff, and I know that's like he's hacking on open source projects all the time and whatnot. It's from the top to the bottom all throughout Software Mansion. So first, Kacper, please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are.
So yeah, as you've introduced myself, I started as a React developer, but then when I go to Software Mansion, I started my React Native career in the React Native open source team. I specifically say React Native open source team at all times because we have different open source teams at Software Mansion. This is not a single open source team here. So I came to Software Mansion. I was a React Native Screens maintainer for a year. Then I went to React Navigation for a couple of months with Satya. You had Satya on the podcast, I think a couple of episodes later.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. After that, I pretty much rewrote most of the Reanimated documentation from scratch with the stylings and etc. So basically, I would say that I'm going where I'm needed the most at the moment in the organization. So it does switch. I do switch roles like on a weekly basis, and this is normal for me.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool. You did mention that you like to say you're on the React Native open source team. So what is like Software Mansion's model when it comes to open source contributions? And what other open source are we talking about here? I think we're just so pigeonholed in the idea of React Native open source. Like what other open source is out there?
Yeah, so at Software Mansion, React Native open source is not the only open source team. We also have our own streaming framework for Elixir. It's called Membrane. It's for
Elixir. No kidding.
Yeah, we have many developers specializing at Elixir for at Software Mansion in Elixir.
Just as an aside, did you know that Infinite Red used to do Elixir as well?
Oh, wow.
Way back in the day. Yeah, we stopped doing that probably in around, I want to say 2019, I think, somewhere around there, 2018, 2019. But I've written a fair amount of Elixir. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so we have a lot of code written in Elixir, also for our clients, not also for open source. So this framework, you can build your own, like Google Meet, Zoom, or Twitch. It's for streaming audio and video.
That's cool.
You know what's funny is I'd heard of Membrane before. I had no idea it was by Software Mansion.
Yeah, there you go.
That's awesome.
So we also do different open source teams, but for sure React Native open source team is one of the biggest or the biggest one at Software Mansion. And it's an important part of our business, like quite literally. There are different reasons why we have this team. The team creates the libraries that we both use, like Reanimated, Gesture Handler, Reanimated Screens. They are very important for the whole ecosystem. They are one of the most important libraries in React Native ecosystem. So there's a whole team that makes sure that they're well maintained.
That's pretty cool that you all kind of focus on all that kind of stuff. And we talk about a lot here on the podcast, how important the open source community is, and the fact that Software Mansion is investing so much into it. Like, I think this is great. I want to kind of not necessarily shift gears, but keep talking about your open source. But I want to talk about one package in particular first, because I think it's probably the most valuable, but also underappreciated package that you all have, and that's React Native Screens. People can agree and disagree with that, but I think this is like one that you can't necessarily have an app, unless it's a one-page app, which I don't think exists anymore. You can't have it without having this kind of underneath the hood, no matter what you use. If you even use the Expo Router, which uses React Navigation, which uses React Native Screens. So React Native Screens is underneath it all. It sounded like you also maintain React Native Screens specifically. Can you talk a little bit about React Native Screens, and also maybe talk to us about some new features that are coming out with V4 particularly?
I did, yeah, okay. So React Native Screens brings native navigation primitives to React Native. So the first versions of React Navigation used to be written singularly in JavaScript. So there are no UI kit underneath, no fragments. With React Native Screens, we have a native stack, which uses the truly native primitives of the platform. There are no CSS or JavaScript mimicking. You're using truly native stuff. Thanks to this, we have large header, for example, on iOS, or a search bar, or truly native animations between screens. So right now, we are working on a new version of React Native Screens. It will be the 4.0. It will come with React Navigation 7 as one of the main dependencies of React Navigation. It will come with detents, like custom detents and bottom sheets on iOS and Android. Right now, in React Native, we are using bottom sheets implemented in JavaScript with Reanimated, which for most of the stuff, they're okay, but they're not truly native. The platforms give us native models, native bottom sheets, so we can just use them, right? It took us a lot of work to bring these. They're still not ready yet, but they will be in a couple of weeks. So it will have a similar API to what we already know. So for example, there is a bottom sheet from Gorham, right? Yeah. So it will have a similar API to the one React Native developers know and love, but will be native.
It's awesome. Yeah, and I think you touched on a lot of things there, where the one important part is you're bringing native primitives to React Native, via JavaScript API and all that kind of stuff. And, for our listeners, you heard it here, like React Native is native. It's just, being not rebranded, but being brought to you all the way up to JavaScript so that it's easier to kind of access all this native stuff hybrid-wise.
So,
yeah, and I think this is kind of a common theme for Software Mansion libraries, where it's this like really well-designed, like almost like dance between the JavaScript and the native side of things. All the way back to, I don't know what the first one really was, but I do remember like encountering Reanimated for the first time, and knowing that it was like, we have like the animated APIs with React Native, and there's use native driver, but that brings like all kinds of there's like a bunch of limitations that happen when you're doing the use native driver thing, where Software Mansion seems to like take the approach of like, we want to do all those things with native, but we don't want to be limited by the JavaScript bridge in the case of the old architecture. We want to take advantage of new things. And so we see that with obviously React Native Screens being a big part of that. And I think that's cool. I think that more within the React Native community need to embrace the native side. Like at least for libraries, like application code, sure, you may want to mostly write JavaScript. Totally get that. But for libraries and for functionality, like being able to write native code effectively and design it in such a way that you can write the JavaScript without losing a bunch of functionality, I think is super important. So it seems like you guys get that.
Yeah. I kind of, you brought up Reanimated, Jamon. I'm going to kind of shift conversation a little bit to there. I think I did a workshop internally at Infinite Red a while ago where I tried to do, what was it? I tried to put together like an oval, a couple ovals on top of each other, and kind of animate in the React Native logo sort of thing. I did it in React Native Animated, and this is no offense to the core team, but it worked. It was performant. I got it performant enough, but then I was like, all right, that took us 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Now let's do this in Reanimated. This was Reanimated V3 when it first came out. And it took less than half the time, and it was just as performant, and it looked slick. So that, I think that's a big testament to what all you all are doing, still giving us access to all that kind of stuff. So my question, kind of maybe leaning towards Reanimated and maybe just open source in general from you all, is what do you all, when you're putting these APIs together, when you're putting these packages together, what do you do? Like, what's the first step, right? Because a lot of people out there are like, well, I want to put together a package, but where do I start? And you guys, you do a great job with it, right? It's readable. The docs are great. It's, I guess, ergonomic is the word here I'm trying to use. The developer experience is great.
That's an amazing question. So there are different parts of building libraries, building open source software. So we first think about solving a problem. This is the most important part. If you're not solving a problem with your product, no one is going to use it, right? So first we solve one of the problems. So the problem with when the Reanimated was born was animated wasn't good enough. We could do better. With React Native Screens, there were no native primitives in React Navigation. So we could do better. So if we could do better, we can create a library. Next step, we try to think about an API that a user would like to use. So we do not start with an implementation, we start with an API. If you're just exploring if it's possible, then yeah, sure, you're trying to build separate runtimes, right? Create worklets, then you first create that technology to make it possible to build Reanimated in the first place. But day-to-day, when creating new libraries and new features for those libraries, we try to focus on the API first. If you have a perfect API, for example, with layout animations, it's an incredibly easy API to use. You just add a single line, right? Entering and then fade in. If you have a perfect API, then we think, okay, is it possible to implement this? So we have a perfect API, then we think, okay, let's try to implement this as close to the ideal use case as we have. So then we have a good library. But a library is not only, it's just a part of the product. There are different parts of building libraries, but other products as well. So, for example, someone has to use your library, right? Someone has to know about your library. So this is marketing, right?
Yeah.
You have to put out the word for people. You have to spread the word on Twitter, Discord, Reddit, wherever, right? But also you need to make it easy for people to use. And as Dr. mentioned, we believe the documentation is also part of the product. It's not the documentation of the product, it's part of the product.
Yeah.
And we've been focusing really hard on the Reanimated documentation, the gesture handler documentation as well, but that will be rewritten later on. It's a lot of work, trust me. So this is the whole packaging. It's not just building libraries, you're building a product.
That's right. I like to call that API first development. I like to call it README driven development. So you write the README first. You're like, this is how the API works. This is how it feels. This is how it looks. You're giving code examples and stuff. And then you work backwards from there and you say, is this even something we can do? And
seems
I feel
about right.
Some of our best open source that we've ever done comes out of stuff like that. And it's also a lot of fun. It's really fun. It's some of the most fun coding because you just have this blank canvas to paint on. And then, eventually you have to get into the technical details. And sometimes you're like, yeah, we can't quite make that work. It doesn't, that would be nice, but we can't. But more often than not, you can figure it out. I want to get to a newer thing, React Native Web GPU. Tell us what this is, because I think a lot of our audience probably has never even heard of it.
React Native Web GPU is actually not a software mention library. So I want to get this straight. This is a library created by William Candion. He's our close friend, but we do not own the rights to the library.
Oh, okay. I actually didn't know that.
Yeah. we do have a developer that helps William Candion to iron some bugs, helps on the issues. So we do kind of help with the development of React Native Web GPU, but we do not own this. But yeah, what is React Native Web GPU? So React Native Web GPU gives you access to Web GPU APIs in React Native, right? Web GPU is the API used by browsers to have a common API on top of native GPU APIs. So you do not write stuff in Metal, Vulkan, DirectX, OpenGL. You have a common API in JavaScript, which is way more useful for our cross-platform development, right? It's so easy that way. And this also gives us one amazing stuff. You can use Three.js and React Tree Fiber as you would on the web in an incredibly performant way. Because currently in React Native, we build 3D stuff using OpenGL, specifically Expo.gl, which uses OpenGL underneath. But OpenGL is kind of deprecated on Apple platforms. I believe so, it's throttled down, so the performance is worse than it could be. So WebGPU is another step forward. And React Native WebGPU uses Dawn, which is one of the implementations of WebGPU standard. It's a C++ library, and this is perfect for React Native because we have C++ bindings in React Native which are easily done by JSI. Technical details, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think we talked about how you're contributing to React Native in general, but it also sounds like some part of Software Mention's, open source model is also helping out William Candion and stuff like that. And I kind of want to ask you another question. You all are helping Expo, and can you talk a little bit about how you contribute to Expo and what that relationship looks like for the community?
So actually, Expo is our client. We are a software agency, right? And for a lot of years, we've been working with Expo, and the employees at Software Mention even say that, hey, I work at Expo at Software Mention, which doesn't make sense, but this is how it is. They have an important part on the Expo SDK team and in the EAS team. Like they play key roles at the Expo company.
With that being said, how do you see Expo's role in the community and the future of React Native with Expo? Because recently Meta announced that if you're building a React Native app, you should use a framework, and the framework is Expo. Yeah,
so as you've said, this was said at least twice. First one on React Conf, the second time at React Universe Conf, that we should use frameworks. And the frameworks of choice by Meta is Expo. And there's a mantra going on for a couple of years now saying just use Expo for your React Native development. And I think this will be the default point forward. Like Expo is incredibly important for us. They have a lot of packages that makes it easier to build React Native apps. And they are trying to get the cutting edge in front of us as soon as possible, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think we have a similar approach at Infinite Red where, Expo just smooths over so many parts of the development process. And now with, continuous native generation and custom config plugins, you really don't have to give up any of your potential power of how you approach and build React Native apps. It's pretty awesome. Expo's not sponsoring this podcast, but we talk about them so often that they might as well. But yeah, absolutely on the same side of things. And what's pretty interesting after all these years is that it feels like React Native is still growing in popularity. And I know you've been at Software Mention for, I think, 4 years now. From your experience, do you feel like you want to keep going in React Native? Do you see other areas that are really interesting that you'd like to expand your own career into, or how do you look at that?
So I see it firsthand how React Native improves year over year. It's literally getting better and better. It's getting more popular. I think it's a framework of choice for me for building any cross-platform apps out there. So I'll keep rolling in with React Native.
So you announced recently that you are starting a new YouTube channel, which is called Minute React Native. It's awesome, by the way. I went and watched a video. I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like exactly what we need in the React Native community.
Thank you.
How'd you come up with that? Yeah, absolutely. How'd you come up with that idea, and like, what are your plans for it?
There's a lot of beginner content on YouTube, which is very long, very slow. The developers are building videos that take a lot of time to watch. They type very slowly. Well, they type slowly, okay? Humans type slowly, which is okay. They look at the docs. It takes a while for the video to start. I thought, okay, that content is not for me. I've been doing React Native for quite some time. I literally want to learn something new very fast. I don't have that much time on hands. So there's this channel called Fireship, which does content for JavaScript developers. I would say, hey, there's a niche in React Native for this type of content for mid to senior developers that want to learn about new stuff in a condensed format. So that was my idea for Minute React Native, to learn the stuff really fast, really quickly, without the BS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, on Twitter, you've heard about, I don't know, Vision Camera for months now, but you haven't checked the docs. But if there were a minute video on that topic, you would maybe watch that, right? So that's my idea.
Totally.
I love, all different types of content being created around the React Native area. And I hope you keep doing it, because that's pretty awesome. I do know that it's hard to keep this sort of thing up. I have my own YouTube channel, a couple actually, and it's been hard to keep the momentum up, but I keep planning to. It's just, it's a lot of work, even for like an 8-minute video. It takes
That's true.
a couple hours. So, yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time, Kacper. It's been great to chat with you again and kind of learn more about the Software Mansion, open source culture and everything. Where can people find you on Twitter and whatnot?
They can find me on Twitter at Kacper Kapuściak. That's my name. And this is one of the reasons I made a YouTube channel called Minute React Native, because it's way easier to find. So you can also find me on YouTube.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, especially for us Americans, where, spelling European names is difficult, although I assume it's probably also difficult for others. But yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and answering our questions, and good to see you again. I've seen you now several times this year, and hopefully, often in the future as well.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, that's it for today. We don't have Robin, so we don't have a mom joke for you all. So you'll have to wait for next time, but we'll see you all next time. Bye.
See ya.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamon Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.